Hello world, it's Catherine here, and today I want to talk to you about my January wrap-up. And the reason this is coming to you so late is because I only read one book in January, and that was The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. Once I was finished with it, I needed some time to kind of process everything, because it's a really heavy book in terms of content. It's rough. It's a World War II novel, so it's by definition going to be a rough read. But when I initially finished, I didn't really know how to feel, and so I wanted to take the time to sort out my thoughts. Officially, you could say this is my January wrap-up, but unofficially, this is also just my review of The Nightingale, because, like I said, that's the only book that I read in January. Also, as I've mentioned in the last video, I apologize for my heater in the background. It's just going to make noise, and there's nothing I can do about it. There's nowhere I can record that you won't hear my heater, so sorry, but it's a thing we get to deal with. Yay! As a rule, I don't typically pick up novels that are about World War II. Because of how much World War II reading I did for school, I don't have any desire to pick up World War II novels now that I don't have to. I avoid them like the plague, if I'm perfectly honest. I don't prefer them, generally speaking. But the thing that drew me to The Nightingale initially was because of the reviews it was getting. I work at my local library, and it was part of book club after book club. It was checked out all the time initially. People were always talking about it, and so I knew it was a big deal. The Nightingale was not about a Jewish person. It was about two French sisters who were living in Nazi-occupied Germany. I'd say probably the first half of the book, while it was difficult for me to get through, I was getting through it, and I was, to a certain extent, actually kind of enjoying it a little. I mean, all things considered, the first half of the book could have been much worse than it was. And I'm not speaking about the writing here. The writing was perfectly fine. I have no problem with the writing. The story follows two sisters. The older is named Vianne, and the younger is named Isabel. They're together for a little bit in the beginning, but then they kind of go their separate ways. Isabel lives in Paris, and Vianne lives in the country where a Nazi soldier has billeted at her house. Captain Beck was his name. And Vianne has a daughter, and so she, while her husband is at war, is trying to keep her daughter, who I think was 8 at the beginning of the book, safe, while trying to deal with the fact that this Nazi soldier is living with her and just making her generally uncomfortable because she has a husband and she doesn't want to let rumors fly or whatever. Meanwhile, Isabel is living in Paris for most of the book. Well, living is kind of a generous term. She was in Paris a lot, but she didn't really live, I think, anywhere for most of it, because Isabel is the Nightingale that the book is titled after. Isabel wanted to do more than the average French citizen, because a lot of French citizens at the time when the Nazis occupied their territory, their country, and took over their government and everything, the French people, a lot of them just kind of let it happen. But Isabel was never content with that, and she always wanted to fight back, and she was always getting into trouble. And so she eventually takes it upon herself to lead these airmen, these downed airmen, British, American, Scottish, what have you, out of Nazi-occupied France, where they would have been killed probably if they had been found, into the safe territory of Spain, which was right next door. And so she would cross the Viennese mountains with these men, and she'd make that trek over and over and over. I forget what the official total was, but I think she made something like 24 or 26 trips or something with these airmen, saving 100 plus of them in the process. So the story, it talks about these two sisters and the different struggles that they had to endure in their respective parts of the country. And like I was saying, I actually, for the first half of the book, while it was difficult for me to get through, I was enjoying it to a point. But then a pretty pivotal character died, and from that point on, I didn't enjoy the story anymore. And I don't think it was necessarily because this one character was holding the story together for me. It was just after this character died, the brutality of the Nazis was really put into the spotlight after that. And that's the part of World War II that I really just avoid. That's why I avoid World War II novels, is because I understand that stuff like that happened, but I don't want to have to know the details. And after this character died, the Nazis were the center of everything, and their brutality and the things they were doing to not only the Jews, but just the French people in general. Like, the first half of the book, I enjoyed it because it was about these two sisters, and it was talking about their efforts, and it was all going okay-ish, all things considered. But then when this one character died, it all just went downhill so fast, and the brutality was highlighted, and I didn't enjoy it at that point. And I've actually been, in talking to my coworkers about having read this book, they asked me why I didn't just DNF it. And it's an interesting question, but I think at that point I was like 150 pages or something away from the end of it, keeping in mind that this was like a 560 page book. And so I was just like, let's buck up and finish this sucker. So I, of course, finished it. And I'm glad I finished it, because I got to see how things ended and to see what became of the characters, and kind of get all the loose ends tied up in a nice little bow. Overall, though, it wasn't my favorite story. I think if you're into World War II era stories, then you will probably really enjoy this. I mean, a lot of people at the library, my coworkers, have enjoyed this novel, but because I don't personally prefer World War II as an era, if I can even say that, but I think you know what I mean. Because I don't prefer it, I didn't really enjoy this book. I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 on Goodreads, and that was after much debate about if it even deserved a 2. I actually was thinking about giving it just a 1, but I liked the first half of it enough that I couldn't say that I hated the book, so I gave it a 2. As I said, that was the only book that I ended up finishing in January, because it was such a big book, and I am a very slow reader, so it took me the whole month just to read that one book. And now that we are halfway through February, I have completed another book, and I'll talk about these more in my February wrap-up. I read My Man Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. As it stands right now, I am only actively reading one book, and that is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. The wait list for this book has been ridiculous at the library, and I finally got my hands on it this past Sunday. Monday. And I had been reading a couple of books between The Nightingale and Children of Blood and Bone. I told myself as soon as Children of Blood and Bone became available to me, I had to drop everything else and just read it, because I will only have it for just a couple weeks, and there's a long wait list after me, so I've got to get through it. I've got to get it back. So I'm power reading through this sucker, and I'm doing okay. I'm like a little bit behind, but not behind enough for me to really worry. And I've got a 3-day weekend coming up, so I think I'll be all right. But officially, I am reading Children of Blood and Bone. Before I got Children of Blood and Bone, I was reading, I was kind of bouncing back and forth between 3 other books. I'm also, whenever I'm done with Children of Blood and Bone, I will resume, I guess I should say, Lies We Tell Ourselves, which is on my TBR. This spur-of-the-moment audiobook that I wanted to listen to called Through a Dark Glass. I thought it looked interesting, and I was like, oh, sure, why not? That's literally my only reasoning behind why I am even reading it, but it's pretty good. And I am also currently rereading Jacoby, and my hope is to reread the whole saga this year, because I very much enjoyed it. My first read-through last year, I loved Jacoby. So that's all I got for now. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you guys next time.